This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Coming through pretty good, or yeah, good.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, good stuff. All right. I believe I got the right slide up there for everybody to see. All right. So, good morning. My name is Jeanette Johnson. I am a park ranger here at the Maritime Visitor Center Museum. I want to welcome you all to the Virtual Visitor Center. This is my first time, so if it's your first time too, yeah, welcome. So to those of you who are new here, feel free to use the chat box to post questions at any time. Periodically, I will ask you, the audience, to answer some questions too. But don't worry, it's not a scary quiz or anything, just some little trivia questions. Today's program will be about the Georgian Bay Lines and its famous cruise vessel, the South American. It was the last steam-powered cruise liner to sail the Great Lakes. All righty. So the early 1900s would see a resurgence of the luxury cruising industry on the Great Lakes. It was known as the golden era of cruising, or the second wave of palace steamer crafts. Dozens of top-of-the-line cruise vessels were built at this time to ferry passengers across the lakes for pleasure travel. The Georgian Bay Transit Company's founder was quick to tap the inland seas and commissioned 2 boats to run the routes for his cruise company. However, the glamorous dream was against a backdrop of strife in the United States. The South American was launched the same summer season that World War I began. The South American and her sister ship, the North American, sailed successful years through both World Wars, the Great Depression, and lasted long after all other cruising crafts had been abandoned in the Great Lakes. The Georgian Bay Transit Company built the 2 lake cruise liners, the South American and North American. The company struggled through turbulent times, but managed to capture the public's attention all the same with their magnificent boats carrying travelers to places far away from worldly worries. In founding the Georgian Bay Transit Company, the company was founded by Robert C. Davis in August 1912. The Georgian Bay Transit Company operated from 1913 until 1968. It was more commonly known as the Georgian Bay Lines. The company launched its first cruise ship, the North American, in 1913. The initial season was very successful, and the following year, the larger sister ship, South American, was christened. Unfortunately, only 4 years after the Georgian Bay Transit Company was established, its president, Robert Davis, passed away in 1916. So financial hardships for the Georgian Bay Lines. After the death of their founder, Robert Davis, the business faced financial ruin. To make matters worse for the fledgling company, World War I would also undercut the lucrative market of the luxury cruise lines on the Great Lakes as demand for recreational travel diminished. During this time, many cruise liners were sold, scrapped, or abandoned. They were also commissioned to be used for soldiers to ferry them to places during the World Wars. However, throughout all this, the Georgian Bay Lines persisted and customers returned after the war. But fortunes didn't last, as the South American caught fire during layaway and the cost of repairs were extensive. We'll cover that a bit more later. We'll go into detail about that. The United States would also soon enter the Great Depression and World War II, affecting all industries, including Great Lakes shipping. The Georgian Bay Lines continued through these economic hurdles, and popularity would surge again for their cruises through the 1940s and into the 1960s. The company chose to upgrade both of its vessels to oil-burning engines to gain more cost efficiency. The 2 ships sailed many successful seasons, transporting hundreds of thousands of passengers to the various ports on the lakes. And then entered the decline of the Great Lakes cruising industry. Over time, the rise of automobiles, jet planes, and other cruise liners, made cruise liners in the Great Lakes obsolete as travelers could jump to more exotic locations for cheaper and further afield. The South American and North American were the last true cruise liners to sail the Great Lakes, but after a series of fire accidents aboard similar passenger vessels, new maritime regulations banned the use of wooden superstructures. So we're just going to put a pin in that point because that's what's most relevant to the North American and South American being retired. We're going to cover that topic a little bit later in the presentation. So the Georgian Bay lines had been successful even after other companies had vanished in the Great Lakes. But that came to an end after the company failed to find a replacement for the South American. The Georgian Bay Lines was forced to sell the vessels after its final season in 1967, delivering passengers to the Expo in Montreal. So here is a map of the routes that the Georgian Bay Lines used for their cruises. There were 3 ships that operated in the Great Lakes. So it was the North American, the South American, and the Alabama. We're not going to talk too much about the Alabama because it only operated in the Georgian Bay lines for a handful of years in the 1940s. It was under contract to other cruise lines. It was a bit of an awkward stepsister to the North American and South American, I would say. It was bought and sold to several different companies over the years, and like I said, it had a very short time that it actually operated for the Georgian Bay lines. So anyways, the routes here were actually divided into northern and southern routes. So get my little pointer here. So the northern routes would come here through the Sioux Locks, over to Duluth and that sort of stuff. They'd usually come from Chicago or Detroit, whereas the southern route tended to stay in the lower lakes. You know, they'd go kind of from this way, and here I'll articulate it a little bit better. So this was considered the northern route here, up through Lake Superior. And again, the southern route was more along this way, and they wouldn't go past the Sioux Locks. They'd stay down here in the lower lakes and go to the ports there. Let's see. So while all the vessels visited each city, the South American primarily did the northern route up through the Sioux Locks and into Lake Superior, and the North American mostly carried passengers in the southern route. So it was a little bit flipped. The North American was in the lower lakes, and the South American was in Lake Superior for the most part. So here's my first set of trivia questions for the audience. When was the Georgian Bay Transit Company founded? If you want to respond up there in the chat, you can just leave a reply. Okay. All right. Yep, correct. So the Georgian Bay Transit Company was founded in 1912. Its first cruise liner, the North American, would not launch until a year later in 1913. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So why did the Georgian Bay Lines almost go bankrupt within its first few years of operation? There are several factors that contributed to the rocky start of the Georgian Bay Lines. Does anybody remember some of the problems that they faced? There's a couple answers. Yep. So that's one of them. So, yep, the first one is Robert Davis. He passed away in 1916, leaving the future of the company uncertain. Yep, World War I. Yeah, that was a very bad time to launch a cruise company. World War I definitely made it a little difficult. Yep. So you guys nailed it. You guys are definitely paying attention. Good work. Okay, so which vessel primarily sailed the northern route in Lake Superior? So a little tricky. Yep, you guys got it. It is the South American. Correct. The South American took the northerly route. Um, and again, all of the vessels did actually visit most of the ports. The North American did come to Lake Superior. It was just less frequent than the South American. So, anyways, I've asked all my questions. Does anybody have questions for me right now about this section? Okay, I guess we'll move on then. Oh, wait, did get a question. Okay, so David asked, was it mainly as transportation to get somewhere, or was the experience itself we're going on a cruise? So the cruise vessels at this time were definitely recreation based. The passenger trade in the Great Lakes kind of dried up, I'd say about, gosh, it would be like the 1870s, 1880s, where it was no longer necessary just to get passengers from point A to point B. Now we're moving on into people were really seeking pleasure travel, is what it was. And these vessels were designed to be luxurious. They were designed to be very catering, and they were, again, top of the line. They were called palace cruisers because they were just built so lavishly, I suppose. But yeah, the entire idea was that we're going on a vacation. So, yeah, good question. Okay. So now we will cover the North American and South American. So the North and South American have been dubbed the sister queens of the inland sea. Described as decadent cruise boats, they pampered their passengers as they visited destinations throughout the Five Lakes. Here's a photo of the two cruise liners entering the Eisenhower Lock together in 1958. So the North American was the first of the two sister ships to cruise the Great Lakes. The ship was the smaller of the two, measuring at 259 feet in length, and it was 31 feet shorter than the South American, built the following season. The North American was launched at Ecorse, Michigan in 1913 and did not retire until 1964. The North American tended to stay in the lower lakes and later would sail all the way to Buffalo, New York, and when the St. Lawrence Seaway opened up, would go to Montreal. And again, both vessels would actually go to Montreal for the expo there. She was auctioned in 1963 and served in the Canadian Holiday Line for 1 year. However, this endeavor failed, and the North American changed hands several times before being sold to the Seafarers International Union of North America in 1967 for use as a training ship at Piney Point, Maryland. While en route, she unexpectedly sank in the Atlantic Ocean about 29 miles northeast of Nantucket Island on September 13, 1967. The North American was being towed by a tug when foul weather hit from an approaching hurricane, sinking the old vessel. No one was injured, and the tug arrived at its destination safely. But the North American did not. So the North American did visit Duluth, during her service. She was a less frequent visitor than her sister. Kind of a cool thing, though, if you see in this right-hand picture, the Ariel lift bridge is yet to be converted, and it still has its original gondola design. So I thought that was pretty cool looking through this. This has got to be one of our oldest pictures that we have of the North American. So. And this is a photo of the North American passing through the Welland Canal. And it was it's a very festive atmosphere on a lot of these boats. You know, again, highlighting that people were going aboard these to have a vacation, to get away from um, worries for a little bit. So. So the South American was the larger of the two sister ships. She was at 290 feet in length, but the vessels were otherwise built very similar. Like her sister before her, the South American was built and launched at Ecorse, Michigan in 1914 after a very successful first season for the Georgian Bay Lines. The South American took the northerly route, including the ports of Duluth, and later, when the St. Lawrence Seaway opened up, to Montreal in 1959, which I covered. It's estimated that the South American carried over 500,000 passengers in her 53 years of service. So the South American caught fire at Holland, Michigan while laying up on September 9th, 1924. While no one was injured, several nearby buildings caught fire and were damaged when the fuel stored on board ignited into a massive explosion. At the time, the South American was only 10 years old, and it cost $1,250,000 to replace and remodel the heavily damaged ship, and it was originally built for only $600,000. It cost the company a literal boatload. She was operational and sailing again the following shipping season, however. So, I mean, they made the repairs really quick. But yeah, I was very devastated by this fire. So just to account for inflation, $1,250,000 is about $4 million today. So it was a very costly repair to make for the South American. The vessel was retired in 1967, but she would change hands for several years before being scrapped in 1992. So here's a photo of the South American visiting Duluth and an undated photo. I suspect the photo on the right is an older one based on the apparel of the woman sitting on the docks. It almost looks Victorian. It's, again, it must be a very old photo. So. All right. So here's our leaping fish. What has he jumped up to tell us? Oh, I think I just got a question. Oh, we'll get to that with the South American. Yeah, don't worry. I'll get into more detail about what happened with the South American. So, alrighty. So the leaping fish has come to say the North American and South American had 5 floors. The whole was steel and the upper 2 floors were constructed from wood. So thank you, Mr. Fish, for pointing that out. Many boats built at this time were a hybrid of steel and wood, which sadly would be their downfall. The wooden superstructures were extremely vulnerable to fire, and there were several high-profile and deadly accidents on cruise vessels that would lead to the ban of all wooden vessels. Superstructures aboard vessels, rather. So what is a superstructure for a boat? A superstructure refers to a building or platform that rises above the deck. In the case of the Great Lakes bulk cargo carriers, the superstructure is located at the rear of the vessel. However, for a cruise vessel, the superstructure is additional decks above the hull. So let me get my little pen out again here. So here, I'll just highlight this section here. All right. So this entire section here is the superstructure for the South American. It was completely built from wood, again, like most cruising craft at that time. When the South American caught fire in port, these two floors were completely destroyed. Only the hull remained, and the rest had to be rebuilt. The rooms for the passengers were also located in the superstructure. So this is where the passengers actually would stay, is right here along the, you can see it here. These are actually the open rooms, and yeah. So anyways, though, that was a rather big problem for cruise vessels to be so vulnerable. There were new fire regulations enacted after several maritime fire disasters, and ultimately classical cruise steamboats were retired from service as they could not meet the new fire safety standards of the United States and Canada. So several, oh, sorry, just lost my train there. So the few cruising vessels that had clung on through the downturns of the business into the 1960s were constructed, again, using these unsafe wooden superstructures. A few of the notable examples were the Northwest, which burned June 3rd, 1911. It was ravaged by a fire, and it led to the end of her passenger service career. I believe it was retired into a barge. The South American, as we already discussed, was rebuilt the following year. So these next two were kind of what ultimately would ban the superstructure. So the Morro Castle was September 8th, 1934, and that was en route from Havana to New York. The ship caught fire, and a total of 130 passengers and crew members were killed in the fire. And the Noronic, on September 17th, 1949, was destroyed by fire in the Toronto harbor. She was the flagship of the Canadian Line's passenger fleet, and 119 passengers died in that fire. So, again, because of these very deadly catastrophes, basically we couldn't have these wooden superstructures anymore. They were tinder boxes waiting to be set off. So anyway, so we're on to our next trivia questions here. So which was built first, the North American or the South American? You can go ahead and put it in the chat. Okay. Yep, correct. So the North American was built first in 1913, and the South American was built a year later in 1914. Okay. So got another one. Which vessel was longer, the North American or the South American? Okay, yep, also correct. The South American was built longer than her sister. She was 31 feet longer, in fact. And the South American had a total length of 290 feet. All right, so what materials were the vessels constructed from? Yep, so the correct answer is steel and wood. They were built with steel hulls and wooden superstructures for their upper decks. Yep, so that's all the questions I have. You guys have been paying very good attention. Do you have any questions for me about this section? All right, doesn't look like anybody's typing. We'll have time for questions at the conclusion of the presentation too, of course. Oh, about the engines. Yes, we are getting to the engines. So now we're going to get into the nitty gritty and have a tour of the South American. So let's roll back the clock a bit and pretend that we are in the 1960s and we have just heard of a fabulous voyage we can take aboard the South American. You have just received this brochure in your mailbox inviting you and your family to take a cruise on the South American. Will you take the 7-day cruise or a 5-day cruise? Or would you rather just get away for the weekend? The choice is yours. So I read through this and did some translation here. So for these different ones, these are the 1960s prices. So for the 7-day trip, $184 will cost us today about $1,700. And the $52 weekend cruise would be, let's see, it'd be closer to about $500. And I don't know about you, but I would definitely pay that to go for a cruise on Lake Superior or any of the Great Lakes, to be honest with you. So, yeah. So now you've picked your trip, but with ticket in hand, there's one last thing to do before packing your bags. Where will your room be? Each deck is open to the outside, and many of the rooms have multiple beds for family accommodations. So this was a really cool flyer that we have here or found. So this indicates the cabins. So the red boxes here, these are all the cabins that you could stay in. And the purple ones, these were the parlor rooms. They were, I guess what you would think of as like a fancier room. They had more beds, that kind of stuff. And yeah, so this kind of reminds me of the movie theater ticket seats you can pick out, or if you go to a concert and you pick out your seat. So it was very similar with this. You get to pick your room, exactly which section of the boat you wanted to be in. It's very nice. All right, so unfortunately, we don't have any photos highlighting the interior of the South American on our collections, but instead I wanted you to either look at these vessel plans or close your eyes and imagine yourself boarding the South American. Luggage in your hand, you're ready to be shown to your room. And I'm going to read an excerpt from this book here. It's called Ladies of the Lakes. It's a very interesting book, so it covers the South American and other luxury passenger cruise liners aboard the lakes, and it's a very good book. This exclusive passenger boat had accommodations for 540 passengers and 160 crew members. The hull was divided into 7 compartments by 6 watertight bulkheads. The 3 lower decks were made of steel and the 2 upper ones were built of wood. The main dining room had a seating capacity for 276 passengers. It was located forward on the orlop deck, the lowest deck on the ship, and it was finished in silvered oak with cork tile flooring. Immediately below this dining room were the stores, refrigerators, and freshwater tanks. Aft on this deck, towards the rear of the ship, there was a bar which was finished in fumed oak with tile floor. The living quarters for the crew were also located on this deck. On the main deck, the aft part of the vessel contained a large social hall and the passenger entrance. Aft, adjacent to the social hall, there was the purser's room, the barber shop, the cafe, and the parcel check room. Forward from the social hall, there was the baggage room and the living accommodations for the engineering crew. The galley was located on the main deck amidship. A series of elevators and dumbwaiters connected the galley with the pantry and storerooms below. Forward from the galley, there was the lower cabin, which was surrounded by 9 parlor staterooms, each with private bath, and fitted with double brass beds and mahogany furniture. The main salon on this deck was reached from the social hall below by the main stairway. The salon was finished in cream enamel, and leading away from it were 128 staterooms with accommodations for 256 passengers. French doors, the ladies' cabin was finished in silvered oak. Both the main salon and, just read that, my bad. The promenade deck contained 52 staterooms and 14 parlor staterooms with baths. An outdoor covered promenade 9 feet wide and lined with deck and steamer chairs encircled the ship. The extreme aft of this deck included a children's open-air playground and was supplied with all sorts of toys. Swings, hammocks, and a pile of pure white sand also attracted the youngsters. The railing around this area was completely screened in with wire netting to prevent accidents. On the boat deck, there were 57 more staterooms and 8 more parlor staterooms. The captain's quarters were located at the forward end of the boat deck, directly under the pilot house. At the extreme aft end of the boat deck, there was a glass-enclosed ballroom, which was fitted with a hardwood maple floor for dancing. Lights throughout the ship were powered by electricity, and all rooms were cooled by mechanical air conditioning, for which a 12-ton refrigeration unit was installed. All water used for washing, bathing, or drinking was filtered. So again, that was from Ladies of the Lakes. It's a pretty good book about passenger vessels on the Great Lakes. So let's see. And also, if you look in these plans here, she acquired her second smokestack in 1922, but originally she was built with only one smokestack. She, burned coal instead of oil, but later the second smokestack would be added on for both the North American and South American, again, when they were converted. So, got a couple of questions here. So yeah, how were they powered? I actually have a great mechanical manual I can show you guys from 1914, and it goes into absolute detail about the engines. So they were designed in such a way, and it was very advanced, again, for 1914, that they wouldn't create any vibrations on the deck. And again, I think I'll post that at the end of this here, so that way you guys can see that really interesting engineering manual from 1914 about the vessel. And let's see, and how large was the crew? So if we go back to our book here. What? So the boat had the capacity for 540 passengers and 160 crew members. So grand total, it was almost 700 people could fit aboard this boat. But yeah, so specifically the crew was 160 people. All right, so moving on for a little bit here. So now we're going to get a look at the crew. So the crew aboard the South American serviced the passengers and waiters, or serviced as passengers, or sorry, let me try that again. They serviced the passengers as waiters, bellmen, and housekeepers. But they were also entertainers for the voyages across the lake. So they were expected to be very accommodating to the passengers. They were expected to entertain and to, if we go to the next slide. So they were expected to entertain. They put on live skits. They would put on music. It's funny. They actually said that within the the application, you had to put down which instrument you could play because you were expected to play instruments in the ballroom every night. And yeah, so it was much more of a personable job. So it wasn't just serving people; it was being a hostess. So yeah. So they would also have birthday parties aboard for the guests, making their special day truly memorable. They also had a pastor who would hold church every Sunday. Let's see here. And these are the two captains who served aboard the South American, Captain Olson and Captain Tetzian. And there was a few crew members from Duluth who worked aboard the South American during the season of 1959. So Marion Kairola and her friend Karen Skoglund were both students at UMD, working through their respective degrees. They decided to apply for a summer job aboard the South American together for the 1959 season. The two young women were sworn in and had received their maritime license as waitresses. Marion and Karen were among the only women from Duluth to serve aboard the vessel during its tenure. In addition, Marion and Karen were serving aboard the South American for its first expo in Montreal. So the South American was set for its first expo in Montreal in 1959 with the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway, providing passageway between Montreal and the Great Lakes. The expo featured visits of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. The atmosphere was festive for crew and passengers alike aboard the South American. This was the extended route for the 1959 season after the St. Lawrence Seaway opened. And here, if I get up my little pointer here, so Montreal is right here, and this has a really good section. This was what actually opened for travel during after the St. Lawrence Seaway connected everything, and this goes all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean. So at this point, Lake Superior all the way out to, again, the ocean were connected. So the Seaway expanded the range of the North American and South American. They can now access all the ports along the St. Lawrence River. But by this time, the Georgian Bay Lines was in its twilight years. So the North American and South American gained several awards in 1958 when they passed through the St. Lawrence Seaway together. So they were the first and only cruise ships at this point, but you still get a first for that. First American flag for commercial ships and first ships to exceed a 14-foot draft through the Seaway. And they had, again, wouldn't start the expo to Montreal until the following year in 1959. But yeah, they made history together. So now we're going to cover the Bon Voyage Tour. So the South American was the last of the Great Lakes cruise liners to be retired after its Bon Voyage Tour in 1967. The final trip of the South American was to the Montreal Expo in Quebec, Canada. She made 18 trips through the St. Lawrence Seaway and delivered an estimated 10,000 passengers in her closing season. So this was the South American's final itinerary, complete with the menu available to the passengers for their voyage to the Expo. The South American wrote a heartwarming farewell as it sailed into retirement, which you can read along with me. So let's see, it says, "My dear, dear friends, today I feel a bit tired and a bit old, yet I am happy because all of you are with me. Feeling tired is just natural as I am finishing the greatest season in my history. In fact, a greater season than any of my forebears. My happiness is tinged with a note of sadness, knowing that I have outlived my dear sister. Looking back over 53 years, we had over 40 cousins sailing the Great Lakes. I am the last. As we would pass each other, some we would barely nod to, while others we would salute heartily. To all my captains and their crew, I want to extend my thanks for keeping me in such good health, and to the officers of the company for their efforts in letting me live comfortably. However, it was you, my dear passengers, who provided my long, fruitful life. I know I will be happy in retirement, and I hope that all of you will come to visit me at Stony Point, Maryland, where I will continue to contribute to the American Merchant Marine Program as a training ship. In closing, I have but one wish. A new generation is about to emerge, and in memory of my dear sister and me, let us hope we can christen her the SS Americana. Faithfully yours, the SS South American. So sadly, though, the promised new generation that the closing letter from the South American's final voyage promised were never realized. The Georgian Bay Lines was unable to build or purchase a replacement vessel for the South American. The company was shuttered the following year in 1968. At this point, the cruising industry had completely dried up on the Great Lakes. The legacy that remained were fond memories of passenger travel upon the inland sea. Okay, so what happened to the North American and South American? Sadly, the South American's retirement as a training vessel did not last long. She replaced her sister to act as a training ship for the Seafarers International Union in Piney Point, Maryland. The ship was going to be converted to a boarding school for children, but the lack of sufficient fire safety that banned it from service in the first place made the conversion unsustainable. The vessel could not pass fire inspection and it was too costly to bring her up to code. The South American would have many would-be buyers and proposals for remodels, but all fell through. The South American was left to neglect and to rot instead for many years until she was sold to Ships Inc. in 1974. The vessel was scrapped in August of 1992 in Baltimore. So yeah, just to reiterate, North American retired in 1964, and unfortunately on its way, it sank in 1967. South American retired the same year that the North American sank in 1967. And again, from the research I did with this one, it changed hands many, many times. They tried to remodel it. They wanted to use it for a children's school, but nothing worked, and ultimately it just rotted and they had to scrap it. So, sad tale for the South American. But yeah, so anyways, what happened to the Great Lakes industry or the Great Lakes cruise industry? So, after the South American retired, the Georgian Bay Lines folded the following year. Cruise vessels all but vanished from the Great Lakes for the last part of the 20th century. Traditional steamboats and car ferries survived in rivers or carried passengers for brief rides to visit local islands and sites in the Great Lakes. But that was all that remained of the passenger vessel trade. It would be almost 40 years before cruising companies began to establish in the Great Lakes again in the early 2000s. Modern liners have gradually been emerging in the Great Lakes once more, and as recently as 2019 to 2021, the cruise industry is undergoing a renaissance as larger craft are built to sustain week-long excursions, much like the routes the North American and South American used to take. Oh, yes, so I got a couple of questions here. I'm just gonna wrap up this last slide, but I will answer you guys' questions. So if you want to learn more, we actually have an exhibit coming soon to the Marine Museum here. It should be up within the next month or so. So yeah, I want to say thank you for coming today to the Virtual Visitor Center, and I will answer up any questions you guys have. So I see that I got a couple of here, and yeah, I will be here for the remainder of the session if you guys like to keep asking questions. Um, so let's see what we got here. So yeah, a couple of good questions there. So there were other cruise companies operating in Lake Superior at the same time as the South and North American. So there were dozens of them, again, during the era of the palace steamers, or they call it the second wave of palace steamers. And this is when the North American and South American were originally built, which is in 1914, 1913. As the parting letter of the South American said, they had 40 other vessels that would cruise the Great Lakes, and they were very similar. Over time, more and more cruise vessels, due to competition with ocean liners, the increased pressures from automobiles and planes dried up the businesses. So I think the only line that was in any sort of competition was the Canadian lines. And again, their flagship actually burned in 1949, but I believe they were still operational through the time that the Georgian Bay Lines was. So, and let's see. So, and which cruise lines are operating today in Lake Superior? So there are a couple. There's a few exciting things happening. Viking Cruises, I believe, is the one that's been here the longest. So it started up in like 2004, 2005, and they have a couple of vessels that tend to operate more in the lower lakes. I couldn't say exactly what their routes are. I haven't looked them up, but they're more in the lower lakes. There is a new boat which is supposed to be launching in 2022 called the Ocantis, and it will have a route between Thunder Bay and Chicago, I think it said, and it will be the largest cruise boat to sail exclusively in our waters. And when I say exclusive, it'll be the largest one that has been here. But they may be scheduled. There's other similar hybrid ones where they go, they operate here in the summertime months, and then they'll go through the St. Lawrence Seaway, and then they'll do small cruises out in the Atlantic Ocean, sometimes down by Florida. I think the most famous one is called like the White Pearl or Pearl Cruises. I'd have to look it up. I have it in my resources here, so let's see. You can probably see here. Oh yeah, it's extremely expensive. Yeah, the modern cruise lines, I would say, are very steep comparatively. Um, so that's another thing to consider, is that domestic cruises are much more costly than, say, an ocean-going cruise. And I did look into that. Most of that has to do with labor laws, as well as the different regulations between Canada and the United States for the Great Lakes. They have to navigate that, so to speak, so it increase the costs. So,
Jeanette, I'm going to jump in and share my screen. I'm just going to put up I've got a little spiel, and then we will go back to questions.
Okay. Yep. Yep.
Okay. You guys see? All right. I don't know why everything's blinking.
Yeah. That's what it looks
But
like.
just to let everyone know, the Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center in Duluth is currently open Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. We've got an online gift shop and a virtual online tour of the museum. At the Soo Locks in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, their visitor center and viewing platform have closed for the season, and their park is still open from 9 a.m. until 6 p.m. And then once again, I just want to point out our program for next week, which will be digging holes in the harbor. Where does the dirt go? So we're having some construction reps and survey crews from USACE, Army Corps of Engineers, to talk to you about what some of the projects are in the harbor. What does dredging mean? Why do we have to dredge? And some of the more recent projects. So that will be. We're actually changing the date on that slightly. We're gonna make it the second Thursday of January, since we're going to have a lot of people gone for the holiday. So we're looking at Thursday, January 13th at the same time. And to your left on that screen are a number of links that you can visit for more information. We've got both of our, the LRE USACE Army is the Detroit District's homepage that talks about the different projects that they've got going on. LSMMA.com is our cooperating association, and then Facebook links for all of the other, for LSMMA, the Soo Locks Visitor Center, and USACE Detroit District. And then a YouTube link is where you'll find all of our recorded programs. We will put this program on there in a day or two, hopefully. So look for that, and look for all of our other past programs as well if you have any interest in those. And then finally, we've got a email list. If you want to join our email list and get an email about our upcoming programs, it's hellolsmvc@gmail.com. And we've also put the survey link and the YouTube link in the chat. So if anyone has a minute or two to complete the survey and give us a little feedback, that helps to drive our future programs. And if you've got any ideas for future programs, please put them in there as well. And now I will turn it back to Jeanette to finish answering questions. I think we've got one from Felicia. That's what we're on next.
Yep. And yeah, what I just want to do real quick was go back to a question before about there was an interest about the South American engines. So let me see if I can just bring up on my screen the link. So it's in my references here about it's called the International Marine Engineering. And this is, again, was published in 1914. And it's available online. And let me see, is there a way to get it over here? Let's see if I can. Okay, can you guys see that now? Can you see the manual here? It's not sharing it.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then make you the presenter again.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It might be coming up.
Okay. Yeah, because this was extremely detailed about the schematics of the boat, how the engines worked, and it's very informational. Yeah.
Okay. You should be the presenter now. Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Will it come up? 1 second. Got too many screens here. Let's see. Okay, I'll try this screen. Share. Okay. Can you see that now?
Yes.
On the Google Books. Yeah, so this is what I would recommend if you wanna. Again, it's in my references here. It's available publicly on Google Books, but can download the engineering manual, and it's actually very long, so it covers more boats than just the South American. But it has very detailed schematics of the engine, how it operated. It's extremely technical. And again, very good. It has all the sort of information that you're asking about engines and stuff. So, yeah. Okay, let's go back. Let's see. Okay. So, yeah, so what does it mean for Lake Superior communities, Duluth, Thunder Bay, to have these cruise ships visiting today? That's an interesting question. It's definitely going to provide a new recreational avenue. It could definitely bring more tourists to these places. And as far as I know, there are no routes scheduled to come to Duluth just yet. The most recent one, again, was the Ocontis going to Thunder Bay. And it was going to be having like a seasonal route between Thunder Bay, Chicago, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's hard to say how it's going to affect things, and if more and more boats they're continuing to be built, I should say. But COVID-19 has also done its own things to the recreation travel economy. I think, as we well know, it's affected ocean cruise liners pretty drastically. So it's hard to say right now if the cruise industry is just going to take off in the next few years. We're going to be seeing cruise boats regularly, if we'll see them every day, just like we do the cargo carriers or not. But yeah, it's kind of a wait and see at this point to see where the economic trends go, I would say. So, yeah. Were there any other questions that we have? If anybody wanted more details about program, or here, maybe I can get to my.
Do you want to talk about your exhibit? What it's going to be about?
Oh, yeah, so my exhibit is going to include the South American, which we mostly talked about here, but also a timeline of the entire cruise industry on Lake Superior. Well, Great Lakes, more specifically. And kind of just has the important events that have happened. And again, it discusses much more about the golden era of cruising, about the first era of palace steamers, and then the second era of palace steamers. We've had a lot of booms and busts in the cruise industry on the Great Lakes for various economic reasons. And it goes into that in greater detail. And then, of course, for the South American, we actually have artifacts and other materials from the South American that will be on display. Yeah. So yeah, it'll be very good, and I hope you come and see it here at the Marine Museum. So. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jeanette. I know you've worked really hard on this and your exhibit coming up, so I'm glad to have everything culminate into a great program today and a great exhibit coming up. We just got a comment from Patty just with a link to an article about the Columbus cruise vessel that stopped in Duluth a few times and passengers were bused to Gooseberry Falls. So hopefully that'll be coming back a little bit. And we'll stick around for a few more minutes if anyone has any last minute questions for the chat. Otherwise, thank you again, everyone, for participating. And we hope to see you on January 13th for our next program. Okay, I don't see any more questions coming in, so thank you to everyone again who is still on, and stay safe and enjoy the holidays, and we hope to see you in January. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks for participating today.